Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we're joined by Bobby Gruenewald, entrepreneur, innovator, pastor, and the founder of the YouVersion Bible app. Before stepping into ministry at Life.Church, Bobby was a serial entrepreneur, launching one of the early web hosting companies, and later building a subscription-based entertainment streaming company. At Life.Church, Bobby helped pioneer church online long before live streaming was normal. Out of that same spirit of innovation, he and a small team launched the YouVersion Bible app. What started as a simple idea to help people engage scripture on their phones has now become one of the most widely used apps in history, recently surpassing 1 billion downloads. Join us as Bobby shares how he's seen innovation, risk, and pushing the boundaries help make a difference in the lives of millions of people around the world. Bobby, thank you for being on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
I'm glad to be here with you, Chris. Look forward to it.
This is super exciting. You're obviously leading something amazing at YouVersion, which we're going to get into, but I would love to hear the journey of how you got to here.
How much of the journey do you want to hear? How far back do you want me to go?
Give me the business highlights, because you've got a cool business background.
You know, I actually, when I went to college, I thought that I didn't think I wanted to study finance. And that's what I did. I thought maybe I'd go into investment banking or some kind of financial planning type space. But I had somebody that was a local businessman that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I was working in the back office at his car dealership, and honestly, I was pretty bored. I was 18 years old at the time, and he had somebody come in. This is 1995, and had proposed building a website for the car dealership, which this is very early on in the days of the internet and days of websites. And so I walked up to the owner after the meeting, because I kind of listened and overheard the meeting, and I think they wanted $2,200 to build like a template website. And I walked up to him and I said, "Mr. Bailey," I said, "if you let me build the website for you, I'll do it for $100. And he just looked at me and he was like, "Sure." Because $100, he had nothing to lose. The problem was I had absolutely no idea how to build a website. There were no books on it back then, weren't even websites about how to build websites. So I had to go figure it out, which I loved a challenge. And so I talked to this guy that was down the hall in the dorms for me in college, and he was kind of one of those internet underground guys, like that just was lights were always out in his room, and he was always on some chat room, probably had illegal software. I have no idea what was going on, but anyway, he kind of pointed me in the right direction. So I built this website, proposed and built another website for the car dealership that was focused on selling parts and accessories called HondaParts.com. And that took off. They were just selling parts and accessories all over the country out of the back of their car dealership and shipping them everywhere. So they were doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in car parts and accessory sales. And so Mr. Bailey called me into his office and he said, "What do you plan on doing in life?" And before I even had a chance to answer, he said, "Whatever it is that you're going to do, I want to invest in it."
Wow.
And that was one of these pivotal moments in my life where I just felt like God said, "Here's an opportunity." And I felt like I was supposed to step into it. Like I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I didn't have any models of it in my life. I had great parents and great family, but they weren't entrepreneurs, and that wasn't something I thought was even kind of possible. But here was somebody that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Looking back on it, I had all kinds of entrepreneurial attributes, including even like proposing to build a website and this second idea. So I put together a business plan for a web hosting company. And back then, there were very few web hosting companies in the world that were focused on web hosting. They had several companies would do web hosting as like a side business for their ISP or for some other type of business. But we thought, hey, we could actually build a company that's very just focused on that one thing, and we could be really great at it. So I say we because I put together a team from the school. I found some of the smartest people I could find in the computer science department and some of the smartest people I knew in the business department. And I invited them all to kind of partner up with me to start this company. So we raised money from that, for Mr. Bailey and one of his friends, the kind of angel investors for the first deal. I thought it was a enormous amount of money because when I was 18 at the time, I just, everything seems like a ton of money. Looking back on it, I probably could have asked them for 2 or 3 times as much money and they would have not even batted an eye at it. It would have been like so easy for them to say yes. But at the time I felt like I was asking them for everything. And so learned a ton. We grew. Our first customer was from Germany, and we grew to had customers in 33 countries, I think, over the next year and a half. I was still a full-time student, and I was very much a more than full-time entrepreneur. So it was like, and I just got married. And so it was like all these combination of things you should probably never all try to do at once, but it was a very, very intense season. And we grew that business, sold it in 98. It was kind of honestly an opportunity to fix some of the challenges that we had with just structure that was different. And we had just a lot of mistakes you make kind of doing your first thing. But everybody made money. And then I started another company that was the largest professional wrestling website. I know it's everything that you think that it is when I just say that, but it was we acquired it. It was one of the customers of my web hosting company. And we wanted to take an online, I partnered up with a new business partner. And we wanted to buy an online community that had a high affinity for the content, but was what we were calling like second tier content, mainly because there was just less competition for that type of asset. And we wanted to grow it and see if we could position it to be something that a public company or somebody that was getting ready to do an IPO wanted, because Wall Street was valuing eyeballs at X, and we felt like we could sort of buy it for less and then grow it and then basically sell it is the idea. We knew there's a window of time. We didn't know how big the window of time was exactly, but we acquired it from a group. We had hired then that group to be the kind of team that ran the website, because they were obviously running it well before. It just became a full-time job for them, and they also had some equity in the company. So they loved it because it was sort of like a hobby that turned into like a real, business. And then we sold it to a company in December of 1999 that Goldman then took public in early 2000. And so at that point I was 23 years old, and I thought this must be what God designed me to do, to start and sell companies, because I'd had a couple of successes and had an investor group that was growing and was very interested in kind of like what was next. And so I planned to start another company, but again, God had a different surprise and different plan. And there was kind of a few events that led to me coming on staff and joining the staff of my church, my local church. And then it's been kind of a wild ride since then.
It's just such a fascinating story on the business side, because I think most people at 23, after they've had a few successes, probably does not jump into church world or anything of Christian content after wrestling content and other things, let alone. It's interesting. How did you come to the decision of, I feel like God is calling me here? And obviously I don't think you knew at the time anything of what it would turn out to be.
Yeah, no, I'm a futurist in my strengths, but not the kind of futurist that sees the future like confidently. So yeah, it was unexpected. So what happened, the actual series of events that happened, was my wife and I, during that second company, we found a church near our home where we built a home, and where we built the home, we went to go look for a local church that we could get plugged into. We found this church called Life.Church. It was a new church, relatively new church, just 2 or 3 years old. And we instantly fell in love with this church. Like, this church is amazing. There was no technology. Air conditioning was probably the best technology. It was very low key as far as all that was concerned. But the people there were so warm and so welcoming. And you could tell that, you could just see that people's lives were being transformed by this church. Like, just people that had been through some rough, phases in life, you could just visibly tell, but God was like doing something really special. So there's this sort of I don't know, you're just drawn into it because you're like, man, we were already Christians before we came, but we were like, man, this is just such a special place. So we started to get plugged in. We got into a small group, my wife and I did, for like young married couples. Um, I started playing keyboard on the worship team as a volunteer. So I was working insane number of hours at work because when you're an entrepreneur and you're 22, 23 years old, I mean, there's just sort of no boundaries to like how much work is, possible. I mean, you can just like, so I was doing an insane amount of work. And then on the weekend, outside, I would work, but then in addition to that, I would serve at the church on Saturday and Sunday because we had 6 services, and I would play keyboard at all of them. And so it was kind of this, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was just like all pulled together in one big thing. Whereas it's like, this is our community, this is our church, we love it. Even at that point, though, as much as I was connected, and involved in the church, I never thought that what I did in business would have application in the church. Not just because it was pro wrestling at the time, but even from the standpoint of just technology in general. Partly because that wasn't even what I saw at church. And then we sold the company, and an article came out in the newspaper that had my picture on the front page of the paper because I was 23, and it was one of the, it's back in the day when all these .com stories were going on. So it's highlighting the sale of the company. And one of the pastors at the church saw the article in the newspaper, and he said, "Isn't that the guy that plays keyboard on the worship team?" And he wanted to go to lunch. And I initially thought that he wanted to go to lunch with me because he wanted to help me calculate what 10% was on the number that he read in the newspaper. But instead, and first of all, and that's not a problem because my wife and I, we love to give, and we're tithers, and we sort of didn't need prompting on that. That was going to happen anyway. But instead, what he asked me at lunch was, he said, first of all, you want to know what I was going to do next? And I said, well, I don't have an immediate plan, except that I'm looking at multiple ideas. I'm going to start another company. This is kind of like what I'm made to do. Like I mentioned earlier, I think this must be what God created me to do. And he said, well, have you ever considered using like what you're learning in business, what you're doing in business, like in a context of the church, maybe like even on staff of the church? And I was like, no, I'd never considered it. And he's like, well, would you consider it? And I was like, no, because I love my church. I just thought if it became a job, that would be like something that wouldn't go well, And in some ways, I kind of didn't trust myself, to be honest. Like I knew my personality well enough to know that like I'm kind of like ready for a challenge. I love a challenge, and then if I wake up and I feel like the challenge is over or it's time for a new challenge, then I don't drop it, but I like immediately go in the mode of like, okay, I'm finishing how to wrap this up so that I can get on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. And I knew that wouldn't be a good thing, to do at a church. So I said, how about I just volunteer and spend more time doing whatever it is that you need me to do besides play keyboard on the worship team? Because I just didn't even have an idea that there was a need or an interest or any of that. And so that turned into like a 10-hour a week volunteer role, then 20, then 30, then 40. And what happened was my passion for the church really just began to eclipse the passion I had for business. It wasn't like one went away. It was just one got way bigger. Yeah. And I knew pretty clearly at that point, but it took about a year. But then when it came to a point where I knew very clearly that this is what I'm supposed to do. And I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't looking for it. In fact, I had said no. Like I thought this wasn't what I was supposed to do. But with a little bit of humility, came back to Pastor Jerry, who was the one that had lunch with me, and said, is there still an opportunity for me to come on staff and be enjoying the team? And he said, of course, let's figure all that out. And we did. So that's when I joined the staff, and that was in 2001. I honestly, even at that point, even though I knew that was my next step, I kind of presumed it was my next step that would have other steps eventually off the team. I mean, I just thought this will be a season, because everything in my life up to that point had like a 2-year expiration date on it. Like it's just every business I started, it was like, seemed like about a couple of years in, it's like, it's time to do something new. And so I just kind of thought this wouldn't be any different than that. But as we're having this conversation today, it's been 24 and a half years, that I've been on the team. And looking back on it, sometimes you cannot kind of only see these things when you look backwards, but when you look back on it, God had orchestrated this really unique path with really unique experiences, both predating even my entrepreneurial start and some of the experiences I had prior to that, those two businesses, the leadership things I learned, just so many lessons, the ability to kind of hear his voice, the things I learned about technology, the ways that I got to be up close and watch like an online community form around pro wrestling, even as crazy as that sounds. Like I learned so much from that then positioned me when I was in not just any church, but like a really special church, to be able to then take those experiences and use those to do some pretty unique things that like I could not have done had I just like gotten an education about it, or just got gone to school and got a certain degree, or had I short circuited all that process and just jumped straight in to being on staff of the church. I would have missed out on something unique that God wanted to do that prepared me for what I was going to do. And I had no idea that was going to happen. I had no idea all the steps that would be involved in it. It was more of a step-by-step process where you're just trying to ask God, like, where do you want me to be today? And what's my next step? Like, what do you want me to do now? And what do you want me to do next? And I'm pretty confident if I had seen the whole map of where it's going, I would have screwed it all up. Like it just would have been like my personality is way too like get to the end and go fast. But the journey itself is what like made the whole thing special. So yeah, I came on staff of the church, never thought I would. And I never thought the role that I would be in at the church and the things we've been able to build and be a part of would have happened either.
So at some point, YouVersion came up, or the idea of a Bible app of some sort. What was the conversation like around that? When you were first kicking around the idea, you're coming on to the church team, you're not necessarily thinking about that.
Yeah. No, so it was actually about 5 years later. So I came on staff in 2001. My first job had not much to do with technology. I had some responsibilities, but it was really more about our churches. It had become a multi-site church, like a church that meets in multiple locations. And so my job was kind of the first 6 locations was sort of help to get it from 0 to 60 miles an hour. So it was almost like startup was kind of the type of vibe I was in, just not hyper technology focused. There was some technology, but it was more limited than what you might think. And then started to process, what did I learn and what was that journey in business for, and how could I use that in the mission to serve the mission of the church, and begin to think about ways that we could missionally use technology externally, like not just to grow our church, but because we were already starting to do that, but ways we could use outside the walls of the church. And this was like the backdrop. This was an ongoing conversation that I was having with the rest of our leaders, Pastor Craig and the team. And they agreed that we as a church should figure out how we could leverage technology as a missional tool. To do that, we freed up some of my day-to-day responsibilities because I had at that point kind of accumulated some teams and responsibilities over those 5 years that just had sort of come with the growth of everything, and freed me up to kind of think more about like what that could look like. There's multiple things in 2006 that we started that were sort of implementing that concept. One was Church Online, which was actually inspired by the professional wrestling website. It was building a community around a church community in an online context. So not just streaming a sermon or a message, but actually really designing it so people actually could be connected to each other, that you could really create a sense of community and connection. So that started in 2006. We started giving away or licensing for free all of our intellectual property, like kids curriculum content, sermon content, anything we've created, we created as a church. We took our name off of it. We gave like kind of like a Creative Commons license, but it's effectively a royalty-free, unlimited license for other ministries to use. And we launched a website called Open that did that. And both those things continue to this day and have affected a lot of people. And then later that same year, I was in the O'Hare Airport in Chicago in a long TSA security line. This was before TSA pre-check. It was before Unclear. It was before anything that let you go fast through the line. It was one of those lines that think you get to the front of it, and then it turns the corner, and there's a whole nother room, with people going back and forth in the stanchions. For whatever reason, in that particular long line that day, instead of me being frustrated, which would normally be my attitude, I was just sitting there thinking, I wonder if there's a way to use technology to help me read the Bible more consistently. I felt like I was a below average Bible reader, somebody that was on staff at a church, but not connected to scripture on a daily basis. I would kind of go through spurts and well-intentioned starts, but I would kind of trail off and lose focus. And, there's a lot of excuses, and people could obviously rightfully say, well, I mean, you just kind of lack the discipline and you should have had better morning routines or all kinds of things you could kind of go through. But I just wondered if there's a way technology might be to help with that. And I had this idea initially for a website. It had some novel features, at least we felt like there were novel features at the time. This predated apps, by the way. This was in 2006. The concept of app stores and all that stuff had not sort of emerged yet at that time. So I shared the idea with some of the guys that were traveling with me there at the airport. I'm an activator, so I just came up with different names, and the best name I could come up with that day was YouVersion for this website idea. So I registered YouVersion.com before I even got on the plane that day. I have a ton of ideas. It doesn't mean they're all good, and it doesn't mean they're all ones that we're going to do. So that was really just me kind of creating an anchor point for the idea, but not necessarily like a green light, we're doing this, kind of thing. I basically came back to talk to the rest of my leadership team, or our leadership team, and shared the idea. And at that point in time, I was presenting lots of different new ideas for different things. So we'd kind of marinate on the idea a bit, talk about some of the pros and cons, and process it. And we decided not too long after that it was worth pursuing and probably worth doing at that time. We were so tight financially though back then that being kind of blessed to do something meant you were blessed to do it, but you didn't have a budget. That was kind of what that meant. And so when I say we thought we might be able to do it, it basically meant I was approved, by the team to like go and spend time pursuing it, but we didn't really have money to put towards it. So it was going to involve good old fashioned leadership, just figuring out how to vision cast and get people to really buy into it. People that would donate their time to kind of help pull together. But God began to bring the resources. He brought a key person onto our team. His name's Terry Storch. He was not somebody I was expecting. He's a friend. And I was not expecting there to be an opportunity for him to come join our team, but God sort of spoke to him as he was hearing some of these ideas and visions that we had for things. And Terry joined our team. And then we started to have other obstacles that emerged with not being able to get the Bible text. I didn't even realize it, and maybe the people that are listening to this are a lot smarter than I am, probably are a lot smarter than I am, but I didn't realize that people own the Bible. I just kind of had this presumption that the Bible's been around for thousands of years. It's got to be free. Certainly the King James Bible's been around for hundreds of years. But it turns out the modern English versions that most people read are all owned by various groups, publishers or Bible societies, or folks that in some cases spent millions of dollars carefully translating it. And so it's understandable that they would monetize it in a way that helped pay for the translation. And some are for profit, some are not for profit. But the point is that was the model at the time. So we had to figure out how to get permission, because we felt like this website needed to be free. So not just needed permission, but we needed permission that didn't cost anything, and wanted to be able to give it away to as many people as possible for free. So it was a pretty hard sell. And we also didn't have any relationships. And just through a series of events, honestly, just being bold and stepping out and declaring that we're going to do it led to a chain reaction of things that ultimately connected us to like the perfect people to get us, the perfect person to get us connected to these publishers. Ultimately got permission from one of them, which is enough for us to start. And we started the website in 2007. I'll try to fast forward the story. The short version of it is we launched the website and it failed. It technically worked, but it didn't change how we engaged in the Bible. So it failed in terms of its purpose, like what the goal was. I'm not afraid to start things that fail, and certainly not afraid to acknowledge that they failed. And that's exactly what we did in December of 2007. It launched in September of 2007. By December, I'm like, this is not working. And, but I wanted to learn from the failure. So I find personally that until you acknowledge something's actually failed, it's really hard to learn from the failure. And there's a hesitancy I know a lot of leaders have where it's almost like this excessive positivity sort of belief that if I'm just like excessively positive, I just can overcome kind of any obstacle. And I understand the logic of that. But I think sometimes if you're not willing, like to say something failed, you struggle to go deep enough under the why it failed part of it to really learn. Like there'll always be like, you might say your ideas will sit more in the, like, what can we improve and what can we change? Or what are some things we could tweak? Or what are some, and it's like, well, what if like the foundational premise is off? Like, what if the actual idea or complete method that you chose to kind of approach it with is the wrong, method? What if we just go all the way back to the problem we're trying to solve and start there? And then say, we still agree that that's a problem, right? Oh yeah, no, it's a problem. Like, it's really a problem. Because maybe that's not even a problem. Maybe that's what you found. That's why it failed. It's like a problem for you, but not a problem for anybody else. It's like, well, no, if the problem's still there, then okay, where did the idea break down and fail? And that process of acknowledging the failure led us to realize that one of the things we felt like was important is to basically have the Bible on a device that we had with us all the time. Computers at that time were desktop computers, and they literally stayed on your desktop. Like, they were not laptops. I mean, there were very few, there were some, but they were not, most people didn't have a laptop. They had a desktop if they had a computer. So a website was pretty well confined to your desk, and your Bible was therefore pretty well confined to your desk. And we thought, what if we could put it on a mobile device that you had with you at all times? So we redesigned the website to work with the BlackBerry. The BlackBerry was very basic smartphone. It was a Crackberry because it was very addictive. It had a keyboard on it, but the screen was really simple. It was small, kind of counterintuitive to think that the Bible would work on it, but it did. And our data showed that it did. The momentum of the traffic going to the website from people using BlackBerries went up significantly. And Steve Jobs announced that it was possible to develop apps and create something. He was going to create something called the App Store. This is now in early 2008. So we just thought we should try to build an app. The problem was nobody knew how to build an app. We found a 19-year-old on our team that loved Apple, and that was about all you had to have back then to build an app, was to be 19 and love Apple. As a part-time project, nights and weekends, for about 3.5 months, we worked together to build this Bible app and submit it to Apple. Had no idea if Apple would approve it. In July of 2008, the App Store launched, and the day that the App Store launched, the Bible app was among the first 200 free apps that were there on the first day. And we were shocked that it made it in the store, but even more shocked when the first weekend we saw 83,000 people install it on their iPhone. And it was just, 83,000 is a big number, but back then, when you're starting with basically zero, 83,000 in one weekend, it was mind-boggling. Like, it was like really hard to wrap your head around. And then we've been on this crazy journey ever since then. That's kind of, and you could say that's where it started. It actually obviously started earlier in the journey, but even then, if you had asked me kind of what I was expecting, I never would have expected that, today we've passed 1 billion installs. And it's growing at the fastest rate this year that it's ever grown at in the history of all the years that we've done it. It's been over 17 years. And so to think that even 17 years later, you're not talking about a story that has peaked, but is continuing to grow. All those things there's so many aspects to it that have been incredible to be a part of. So that's a really long answer to your really simple question.
Why do you think that the rate is growing faster now when it seems like the Bible might be more accessible than ever?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right. The Bible is more accessible than ever in many ways. We have our app, obviously. There are now thousands of Bible apps. Like, we're not the only Bible app that's out there. Print Bible sales are actually up and setting records, and particularly among Gen Z, where we're seeing, 25, 30, 33% year-over-year growth in print Bible sales. At the same time that you're seeing digital Bible engagement, like on YouVersion, set all-time records. I mean, our highest days of use were here in the fall, which is not seasonally a high time of the year, but that's our all-time historic highest days ever. So the answer to your question is, I don't know. No, that's the quick answer. The more thought out answer is, there are multiple trends that we see happening globally that I think play into it, but there is a certain aspect to it that feels like God's doing something that is a little difficult to explain, like in its entirety. But I do think that one of the dynamics we see happening right now, particularly with the youngest generation, Gen Z, Gen Y, is they're growing up in a time where they pretty much have to question the veracity of everything that they consume. You and I have been around a little bit longer, and we knew that there was a time when we didn't actually have to question everything we watch and read and wonder if it's true. Like, we used to be able to say, I've saw it with my own eye. I know that it's real. And now that doesn't mean the same thing anymore, right? Like, you can watch a video and it looks as real can be, and it was completely generated by AI. Well, we have a generation of people that came after us that actually that reality is the reality for them. Like, they haven't known a different reality. Like, pretty much they're not adult, if not their adult life, their sort of teenage and early adult life is basically filled with this dynamic. So when you think about that, like, what's the consequence of that? And one of the consequences of that is that you develop a hunger and sort of a quest to find out what's true and what's real. It's just sort of a reaction to that environment. And so you take something like the Bible, and the Bible is so unique. There's nothing like it in its category. It was written thousands of years ago, and it's been carefully moved from generation to generation, thoughtfully, through very dark periods of time, through times where we're basically translating the Bible, or even transferring the Bible, was something that you'd get killed for, burned at the stake for. But it's managed to sort of not just survive, but thrive through all these generations. And you can actually go look, right at the time of this podcast, you can look at the Museum of the Bible, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display. And you can see that the content from this artifact that's thousands of years old, and the writing in it is consistent, different language, but consistent when translated with the Bible that we read today. And so you look at that, so there's nothing else like it. And so when you have a sea of people out there, a generation of people that are just looking for something that can be trusted, looking for what source of truth, it's not a big surprise to me that the Bible resonates. That it's sort of like, wow, like, this is the moment for the Bible. In many ways, the Bible is the answer to the problem that everyone's complaining about like what we're having to deal with being inundated with all this sort of fake content or false or generated content. So I'm not trying to say that all generated content is bad. I'm not trying to say that everything, about technology that's happening today is something that is terrible. I'm just trying to say that this is sort of a reaction, though, that happens when you find yourself inundated with things you can't trust the veracity of, or if they're real. I think there are people that look and say, maybe there's answers for the challenges I'm dealing with that I can count on in something that predated all this. And not just something, but something really special that is the Word of God, and that people have been able to trust for so many generations to do it. So I don't want to kind of oversimplify it, because I think there's a lot of dynamics, that are at play, but I think that's one of them. And we definitely see this. It's a global thing. It's not a phenomenon that's just happening in one country or another country. It does happen in certain regions more than others, but it's definitely something that we've seen happen everywhere.
I love that. I've never thought of that perspective. But
That rings so true, and it makes sense. One of the things that I've always been curious about, just from the outside, and we talk a lot about servant leadership on this podcast, is you guys have so many good ideas, you and your team, and you create and spend a lot of money making really good things. Church Online, YouVersion, dozens of other things, and you give them away. It's not a great business model, at least from the outside, to give stuff away. Where does servant leadership play into this and all the decision making? Because it feels like it's been at the root of a lot of the decisions you've made.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are all former business people, or maybe even just business people at heart, that have felt like for our church that God's just called us to do the things that we do externally for free, or at least they're not free to create. Like you just mentioned, there's a lot of money that's actually invested in them, but they're free to use, and they're free to people to be able to benefit from. And I feel like from a servant leadership perspective, I think the number one thing that goes through my mind as we were thinking about solving this problem was really, what are the obstacles and what are the barriers? And how do I remove all those obstacles and barriers, for people? Because we're so missionally concerned about the result that I wanted every obstacle and barrier to be on the table. Mm. And at the time that we started this, you had a generation of people that couldn't fathom paying 99 cents for a song that they loved. Like, the concept of doing that was just so foreign. They had just come through seasons of downloading songs illegally through all the file sharing services and all that. And at that time, we were asking them to pay, not we specifically, but we collectively, meaning we, the church, the industry, the Christian music, Christian media industry, publishing industry. We're asking them to pay $25 for a digital copy of a book that they didn't understand. Mm. And so it's not that there's something wrong with asking $25. It's just, I knew that was going to be an obstacle, right, for this generation, because you're like saying, I need them to actually see what's inside. And to do that, I can't put a barrier that, like, when they won't pay 99 cents for music they love, I can't do this, for something that they're not even sure of, they're trying to figure out. That was back then. And so we just didn't want that to be a holdup or a barrier. Technology also allows us to scale things like never before. Like, the concept of doing what we're doing, and if you back up and do it 45 years ago, or 30 years ago, it was just, there wasn't a practical way to do it. Like, it wasn't possible. Like, you had to print things that, like, scaling a ministry, giving away print Bibles is really, really hard to do because the cost structure is just so significant, so substantial. And it's not that I'm saying it doesn't cost anything to do, but when you think about kind of the scalable aspect and how many cents per person it takes to kind of get down, even on a marketing level, and all the different aspects to it, it scales really well. So if it can scale well, why not try to build a different model around it? We do have a business model. It's just a different business model. The business model is that we're donor funded. We're more than just not a not-for-profit. We actually don't have advertising. We don't sell data. We don't do a lot of the other monetization things that people think would be what we probably do, but we don't do those. We've never done those. Because trust was the other thing that we're trying to solve for. And I think, thinking about it from a leadership perspective, we just were like, man, we want to lead the way with irrational generosity by investing the resources that we're entrusted with in a way that serves other people. But in doing that, we inspire other people to want to do the same. Mm. And so we have businesses, we have entrepreneurs, we have a guy from India that gives 200 rupees, which is like $1.97 every month, and is so proud to do that every single month to make it possible for other people to access the Bible, all the way up to people that write 7-figure checks, to support the work that we do, because they're inspired by our generosity, and they're like, if these guys are doing this with their resources, I can do it with mine. And we create opportunity because we've sort of built this this ministry in a way that allows others to be involved and partners. We've created an opportunity for people that have a high capacity in their own resources to have a fruitful ministry that they can be a part of, that they don't have to go through all the brain damage and the hard work that we did trying to build all this. We can enable them. We can deploy their resources in a way that get people connected to Scripture and impact people's lives. But we're always trying to serve the person that we're trying to reach first in everything that we do.
When people look at it from the outside, it might look like everything you're doing works. You know, Church Online, YouVersion, all these different things, scaling to 1 billion users. But there's plenty of stuff that doesn't work.
Sure.
How do you keep the innovation alive and know when to just stop stuff?
Well, I gave you an example already when I talked about the story and the website, obviously, that didn't work. Keeping the innovation alive is the harder one than stopping stuff for us. But I will say for a lot of people, it's kind of the reverse, though. I think a lot of people typically, the fear of failure is sometimes a fear that people reference when they think that, like when they're referencing the fear that keeps people from starting something because they're afraid it'll fail, like the fear of failure. I'm too afraid to fail. That's why I couldn't be an entrepreneur and start something. I actually think for most people, the fear of failure is not the thing that keeps them from starting something. It's the thing that keeps them from stopping something that's not working, because it's only then that you actually really have to acknowledge that it failed. Because you can start stuff all day long and it can just be this like, yeah, we're working on it. It's not there yet. It's we pivoted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and we're still calling it the same thing. It's not a failure if you don't stop. It's not a failure if you don't give up. All these kinds of phrases, that we use. And I think so. It takes a little more courage to kind of acknowledge. I feel like we culturally in our culture have managed to do that. I might have some blind spots I'm not catching, but generally speaking, it's like we look at the data. It's not working. Make sure we understand why it's not working. But if it needs to be cut, it's cut. We launched a podcast feature in the Bible app, and it took us way longer than we anticipated to launch it. And it lasted a year, less than a year maybe, before we cut it. It's not that podcasts are bad. I mean, obviously we're talking on one right now, but it didn't get, it's either, you could say it's the way we did it. You could say a lot of things. Might have been the way we architected it. Might have been the way we went to market. It may be something that gets brought back in the future, but something will have to be different about it when it gets brought back because the first iteration of it didn't work. Innovation, the challenge there is, I think innovation happens best inside of constraints. At the beginning, we had everything was a constraint, budget constraint, time constraint, because we had, I had other jobs, like other responsibilities, like that were plenty. So this was like extra, on top of that. And we had staffing constraints. We had all those things. But those worked to our advantage because it allowed us to just do things in ways that other people wouldn't have thought to do them, because we didn't have a choice. Like we kind of had to come up with an innovative solution to how to solve the problem. When you have financial resources, or when you have a team, or when you have time, or when you have all those things, the first thing to go is innovation. Like that's what leaves the building. And the reason is because you can just buy stuff. Like I can buy a solution. I don't have to innovate one. And buying things generally is a whole lot easier. If I could solve the problem with a check, I mean, why not, do that? Now, I'm not trying to imply that we can just write a check for everything today, but we do have a lot fewer constraints than we used to have.
Yeah.
And it's not just a financial resource thing. We've got team, we've got gifted and talented people. We've got all these things that we didn't have when we started. And so you really have to fight to stay innovative. And sometimes you got to put artificial constraints on things. I mean, one of my favorite artificial constraints is time. Because if you just allow whatever amount of time for something to happen, your ideas won't get more innovative as time goes on. They'll get less. But saying, how do we accomplish this in half the time or a third of the time? The other day, I gave a challenge to the team to take a process that we had that I felt like was just excessively long And I challenged him. It was taking about 3 weeks to do this process. It's a routine thing we did, and every time we did it, it took 3 weeks to do it, and it was like clockwork. And it had grown to that because there had become complexity and all this stuff in it. And on that particular one, I said, the challenge and that what we need to do is to move it to 48 hours from 3 weeks. And at first it was like, this doesn't sound like a good idea. Help me. And I said, no, I want you to think through, there's some technology I think that can enable us to do it, but a lot of it is the assumption of risk. And then some of it, which I'm completely good to assume. And then some of it's just really thinking differently about every hour of the 48 hours, not 48 work hours, 48 actual hours, right, to do it. And so they took on the challenge and they did it. Like they came up with a whole new approach, but it required like the constraint of time, on it. And they came up with this innovative way that they accomplished it. And we've had great success. I think we had one time recently we missed it because of some variable that came in place. But man, if we could, do that 90% of the time successfully, we just saved a ton of time. And it also drove a more innovative approach. Now, that approach is also not like an industry standard. It's like the opposite of an industry standard. And so that's the other thing that happens too, is that we have a lot of really talented people and they come in with experience, and experience works for you in several ways. It works against you in many other ways. Part of our greatest benefit we had early on was we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't even know the correct way to do it, let alone we had no experience doing it. We didn't even know what the right way to do it was. And those were to our advantage because you're just like, well, why can't we do it in this time? And why can't we do it this way? We hadn't read the book yet, like on how you're supposed to do it. And so I have like quirky things about the way that I lead. And one of them is I say that I loathe best practices. Like I don't like best practices because usually a best practice is our effort to do something as well as someone else who wrote the book on it does it. And we're probably not likely to exceed the level at which they're able to do that because they're the ones that wrote the book on it and probably perfected that approach. And so we're always going to be aiming likely to basically do it as well as the best person that did it or the best that approach. And I just feel like that already by definition keeps us from trying an approach that could be 10 times better.
Yeah.
And so we kind of try to keep these things. This is what I say that because these are ways that I try to lead and drive innovation today. Because when you don't have these kind of overt efforts as a leader to do that, you're going to be left with responses that look like the sum of everybody's experiences, which are not bad things. They're just not going to ever 10x something.
Well, I love just the thought of the practical application, even for our own team and probably a lot of people listening, that they can take and move on to their next adventure or whatever it is that they're trying to do time-wise. How would they cut it in half or shrink it into 48 hours? There's just a lot of practical application.
Yeah.
With our last 60 seconds, I want to hit you with 10 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And I just want you to say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh no, this is going to be a problem.
And there is no right or wrong answer.
That is not true. I can say wrong answers all day long.
No, there's nothing wrong. Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
My wife.
All right. I've met her. She's awesome. 5 words that most describe you.
Probably jumps to mind are the strengths finder. So competition, competitive, activator, futuristic, achiever, and ideation.
I think literally those are my 5, ironically. Favorite author or book?
I can't say the Bible. Oh gosh, I would say this is a funny answer, but like I don't actually read very many books. I read book covers.
Yep.
I can generally learn what the concept of the book is on the back of the cover, and then that's enough, and save all the fluff time. Or I read book summaries. One of those is it's an older book. I think it's called The Houdini Principle or the Houdini solution. I'm not sure. It's one of those two phrases. But
Okay.
funny things, I've recommended the book 100 times. I don't think I've ever read the whole book. But it is the principle I just talked about, which is that innovation happens inside of constraints.
I will check that one out
Yeah.
for sure. That's a good one. And I haven't heard of it.
And,
Favorite.
and you say, and for me to say favorite is probably a massive exaggeration. It's just the first thing that popped in my mind.
The best back of the book cover.
Yes.
Favorite food.
Favorite food. Probably Thai.
Favorite thing to do in your free time.
Fly airplanes.
All right. This might actually fit that, but what's a surprising fact about you?
I was a Christian rapper for 5 years.
I didn't know that. What's the best advice you've ever received?
First thing that comes to mind when you say that is probably advice that Craig Groeschel said that someone else gave him. So this is a little bit, so I received it, but I received it via someone else. And that was, we will tend to overestimate what we can do in the short run and grossly underestimate what God can do in the long run. So the emphasis on just sort of consistency over time, like we have, like, and I'm wired towards that notion of like what can get accomplished in the short term, but then realizing and appreciating the value of this sort of consistent faithfulness over time.
Well, that's kind of the story of YouVersion and a lot of the stuff you've done. Favorite place you've been and somewhere you want to go?
Okay. My two favorite, I'm going to put my two favorite cities, because I haven't figured out which one's number one, is Cape Town, South Africa, and Melbourne, Australia.
Love it.
And as far as like places I want to go, I want to go to Russia.
Cool.
Yeah. I haven't been to Russia.
All right. And last one. Why do you think a podcast on servant leadership could be important for people?
Well, I think, I'm a follower of Jesus, and Jesus was kind of like the ultimate servant leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think so many people get models of leadership or pictures of what they believe is leadership from, whether it be social media, from something that they see on CNBC, or from, what they see maybe in the billionaires that are out there, like the world's richest people, and kind of how they lead, like a story about Elon Musk or about whatever it is. And while all those people are interesting, they don't always, and I don't want to call any specific one out, but they don't always reflect servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of the models we see in our lives that are heralded as the world's top leaders don't resemble what I feel like is the best model for leadership. So if you have a podcast that is one platform to be able to sort of get out a message of what it is, I think this is better. This is a better thing for leadership in general.
Well, thank you for being on our Servant Leadership podcast. And I'm just so thankful for the work that you and the team have done on YouVersion. Thankful that you're willing to share some wisdom and some of your story with our audience. What's one thing, if you could ask people to do anything related to YouVersion, what would you want them to do after listening to this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started like this journey, as you heard me say, because I was trying to find a way to use technology to help me read the Bible more consistently. As we're recording this, I think I'm like 8 days or 9 days away from a 3,000 day streak in the Bible app. And so I've managed to find the rhythms and routines. And the reason that that's important is that when we make God's word a part of our everyday life, that there's been science and there's been research that indicates that actually has measurable changes in our behavior. Like 4 more days a week in the Bible, and divorce rates go down, drunkenness goes down, porn use goes down substantially, like not just a little bit, but a lot. Things that even I think secular society, people that aren't Christians, would look and say, these are good things. These are things that we would probably all want in our lives. And so my challenge to people that are listening is that if they don't have the Bible as a part of their everyday life, why not start today?
Love it.
We've built an app that makes it really simple. They don't have to use our app. They can use any app that has similar features, or they can use their print Bible if they want to. If they don't have one, they can get one. But our app is completely free. It's non-commercial, and it's literally designed to try to help make it easy for you to make the Bible a part of your everyday life. So if you've tried everything else, why not try the Bible? And you can download it for free. Just go to the App Store and search for Bible. It should be the first one you see. It's a brown Holy Bible icon. Yeah. And I just encourage people to take the time to do that and just see what God does. You might not be a Christian. That's okay. Many people that use our app aren't Christians. You might think, well, where do I start? Well, that's the whole point. We've kind of really tried to help make that easy for you because the Bible can be intimidating. Well, so my encouragement would be for them to do that.
We'll take that and throw it in the description so people can easily find it. And thank you again for being on the podcast. What a pleasure.
Of course, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.